Hi, and welcome back to another week of the What in the World podcast, a Hungry for Life podcast where we talk about all things to do with global nonprofit issues and other things. So today we have a special guest with us, Lisa Devries.
Yeah, Devries.
I should have asked you ahead of time. Lisa Devries. We're going to do a bit more of an intro on her in a second, but our aim is to educate and inspire people to live a life of compassion, generosity, and to seek and see God through it all. So today's podcast is titled Understanding Trauma. And here to talk, I already introduced you, Lisa from Mercy Seat Ministries here in Chilliwack. And Mercy Seat Ministry is a collective of counselors who integrate common therapy practices with faith. And we've asked her to join us today to shed some light on the topic of trauma, which is not a little topic, but she was willing to come here and do that. So again, welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for taking time out of your day to do this. Can you elaborate any more about Mercy Seat and how is it different from any other common counseling practice?
Yeah. So Mercy Seat aims to integrate faith into the healing process. So it's really common, I think, for believers when they go through something difficult in life that they are struggling with the issue, whatever's presenting. But naturally, there's faith questions that come up as a result of that. And so we try to take a really intentional approach of dealing with the whole person and including spirituality in the healing process. So we're talking about all the typical emotional and cognitive and behavioral kind of things, but also really having a keen eye toward what God is doing, how the client is doing with God in their journey through whatever they're going through. And so, we find that work to be delightful. It's so awesome to see God move in those vulnerable places that people are when they're coming for counseling.
Yeah, I love that model. I think it's super unique for counselors. I mean, at least I don't know of anyone else who does practices the way you guys practice. So I think it's really neat to integrate counseling and bring Jesus along into your journey of that. And even in this topic today, we're kind of gonna circle back to how do we take Jesus along on the trauma response journey.
Yeah.
So why trauma? I would say every single one of our international partners, that's what we call our partners overseas. International partners, it's a mouthful. I don't like that term. Anyways, they've experienced or are experiencing trauma. I would say every single one of them. So trauma would look different in every country, but the most obvious would be Ukraine at this time, that being war. But there are countries dealing with natural disasters, economic disasters, trafficking, abuse, abandonment, and the list goes on. So we always strive to educate our teams on culture and socioeconomic factors prior to them getting involved. And so we thought this would be a really good resource for people heading out on field or every day, because I think this is a pretty good generic topic as well. So
yeah, you bet.
Let's hop to it. I would say, can you define trauma for us? Because I think it's an abused word.
Right.
So can you just shed some light on what is trauma?
Yeah, I think sometimes we make it more complicated than it is. Trauma is just when we encounter an experience that's highly distressing or disturbing, right? That's traumatic. It rattles us, it gets us all worked up, and it's hard to come back down to calm after a traumatic experience.
So it's like I just think of people who would say, running a red light and almost getting in a car accident that is so traumatic. But is it?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think that trauma is not an objective black and white issue. It's not like these certain events are traumatic and these other events are not traumatic. It really has to do with how the person responds to the event. And so for some people, say the loss of a pet could be pretty insignificant, right? But to someone else who has a close bond with their pet, that could be incredibly traumatic. It could take them a long time to recover from that. And so really what we're looking at is not an objective like as though an outside party can look at a situation and say, this meets the requirement for trauma and this doesn't. We're looking at more what kind of impact does it have on a person? Are they highly distressed? Are they having trouble regulating their body? Are they bouncing back from that experience or not?
Okay. And you mentioned like while we were kind of going back and forth a little bit ahead of the podcast, you mentioned some common symptoms following a traumatic experience. So you just mentioned some now. So intrusive thoughts, flashbacks, nightmares, difficulty sleeping, hypervigilance. So would that be kind of somebody being a bit, this is not good terminology, but like sketched out?
Yeah, sure. Highly reactive. But let me back up for one second.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So one of the signs of traumatic experience is that our body, our whole system gets thrown into fight, flight, or freeze, or fawn. You could throw that into.
What's the last one?
Fawn. It's another category that some
Okay.
people add to that.
Okay.
Fight is when we want to tackle the problem, like we have an instinct to overcome the issue. Flight is when we want to run away. Freeze is when we play dead. We're just like silent, try not to make anything worse. And fawn is one that kind of relates to almost placating, making peace with whatever is happening so that we don't bring on more heat toward ourselves.
Oh, I haven't heard of that one.
Yeah. So anyway, it's just kind of expanding the definition, but it's
Right.
basically any of those are, if we want to get scientific for a second, it's our sympathetic nervous system kicking into overdrive to try to help us survive. Okay, it's actually a beautiful system that's created by God. It's given to us for our self-preservation, right? And so when we perceive danger, when we think that we're not safe, when something's highly distressing, we feel like we're in danger. And when that happens, our body has a way of responding that gives us our best chance of survival. Okay, and so that's what's happening in a traumatic experience. It's beautiful, it's good when there's danger. But what happens sometimes is that because it was so distressing, when the danger is actually removed, our body doesn't settle down. And so we are living in this perpetual state of heightened arousal. We're looking around every corner for danger. We're easily like skittish or like startled easily, or slight noise or sound can trigger us. And our body kicks back into this sympathetic nervous system response, even in times when we're not in danger. And so when we've experienced when we've had a traumatic experience, sometimes we get stuck there. And we're either perpetually there, which is exhausting, or we are easily triggered back to that, even when we're not in danger. So it's like our body gets stuck and it gives us a whole bunch of false alarms, right? The smallest little or not the smallest thing, but something that reminds us something of the trauma can make us activate as though we're back in it, when in actuality we aren't. And so those are painful and exhausting experiences. And so for it to be happening involuntarily over and over and over, and we're just in this heightened on state, is really hard on our body.
Yeah, and I think my notes will take me to a person's physical response down the road, which if I don't circle back to that, remind me, because that to me is also a fascinating one. Like, I mean, fight, flight, or freeze, it is a physical response, but I mean, like, what does, like, the long-term toll on somebody's health? Yeah, anyways.
Do you want to touch on that real quick?
Sure.
Okay, I would just say one of the biggest pieces to note there is that when we're in that response, our body releases chemicals that try to help us, right? It's helping us survive. But if we are chronically in a state of having those chemicals, the big ones noteworthy, I mean, there's more, but would be cortisol, which is our stress hormone, and adrenaline. And so if we get stuck in a state where we're producing those all the time, our body can't handle it.
Right.
And so we often see a breakdown. We see chronic pain, a lot of headaches, stomach aches, and sometimes we see the rise up of autoimmune disorders and some other diseases that can pop up. Yeah.
I just put a hold on a book at the library called the Body
Keeps the Score.
Yes.
Yeah, beautiful book.
Is it worth a read?
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
Yeah, it's kind of a landmark book.
Okay. Well, I'm like 157th in line, so it'll be my summer.
It's a long book, so it might be a while before it's returned.
Oh man. Okay. Let's talk about well, we kind of did already. Levels of trauma, like, but diving into that a little bit deeper. Would you say there's worse trauma? Like talking about, okay, we have partners who are in war right now. They're living in a constant state of cortisol and adrenaline pumping through their body. Or again, does it just go back to your, like, how you as a human being respond to that?
Yeah. There's greater and lesser distressing events.
Okay.
Right? So there are some things that we would all agree. It would be extremely rare for somebody to live through it and not have a traumatic response, right? War would be one of those things. And yet even within war-torn countries, we see people responding to greater or lesser extents with this perpetual fight, flight, or freeze kind of response, right? And so the biggest reason why I want to highlight that it's more how the person is responding isn't because certain life events aren't more distressing than others in general. Yeah, they totally are. However, that could lead us to minimize somebody's experience of difficulty following trauma if it doesn't fall into one of the big categories, right? And so sometimes we don't know why a particular thing lands on us as traumatically as it did. So I can think of times where, let's say in our context, maybe I'm counseling somebody who's been through infidelity in their marriage. And for one person, they have a real clarity on, say, a piece of, say, how loved they are by God, or they're very strong in their identity, great ego strength, And when that happens, they have a way of processing what's happened that doesn't leave them as rattled and distressed as somebody else might. Okay, that's a beautiful provision for them in that moment. But then we can't look at everyone who's been through infidelity and say you should respond like this. Because for someone else, maybe they don't have those pieces in place, or they don't have support, or they were more blindsided by what happened, or, it involves somebody who was closer to them or something like that. And we can't see all of those factors for every person.
Right.
And so basically, if a person is having a body response where they're stuck in this cycle, I wouldn't ever be one to say, oh, well, that doesn't count as trauma. So I'm wanting to hold very carefully anybody's response where their body gets stuck like this. And of course, some things in life are worse than others, right? And there are some pretty universal experiences that we would call traumatic. It would be very rare for somebody not to experience it as traumatic, or would be one of those being, the sex traffic industry would be incredibly traumatic. Loss of a loved one, any kind of violation of a person or anything like that would be very likely to produce this kind of result in someone.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yep. So I was, as I usually do when I'm getting ready for a podcast, I fly the idea around the office. And somebody was like, brought up the idea of micro traumas. What is a micro trauma? Is that like a common term in counseling?
Yeah, maybe it is. I haven't actually heard the term before, but that doesn't really say a lot. I mean, maybe that's a thing. Yeah. What I would imagine that it means is a whole bunch of small traumas that can also occur, and they can take a toll in a different kind of way.
Yeah. Right.
So to be in a chronically stressful environment, it might not be like one of the big heavy duty things, but over time that can produce the same physical response, right? So if you imagine micro stressors causing us to create cortisol and adrenaline, but it's not one stressor, it's a whole bunch of stressors, you still end up in that chronic state of arousal all the time.
Yeah. And what happens cognitively when you're in this state of fight, flight, or freeze? Like when you were talking about that before, you say it's a beautiful provision, but then the first thought that went through my head was, at what cost? Like what is giving in order for your body to go there?
Yeah. Well, I think our body prioritizes what's most important, right? So if I'm walking down a trail and a bear jumps out in front of me, I really don't care about anything else. I just want to survive that moment. And so my body does put all its resources towards surviving that situation. I'm thankful for that. That's positive. However, if I'm chronically in that situation, or it's a war-torn country and no one can get reprieve from that, then the body is breaking down because it's having to function at a level that is not meant to be a long-term way of coping.
And what happens to decision-making ability?
Yeah, people get different things for different people based on fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. But one of the main words that I would say is that we get more rigid in our thinking. Okay. So when we're calm, we have a certain degree of cognitive flexibility, right? We can see things from different angles. We can entertain different thoughts. If I have to survive a moment, my brain gets really narrow on the one thing that I think will be my best chance for survival. And it makes it so that we don't think of all the other options very well. And so in a survival situation, again, that's a provision, right? I don't want to be being chased by a bear and being like, oh, look at that lovely flower. Like, I don't want to be distracted.
Stop and pick it.
Right. Right. However, if my body is doing this at times when I'm not in intense danger, or I'm having some of those false alarms, it can be really hard interpersonally because maybe I perceive, if I was engaging with you, maybe I might perceive how you're saying something to me as a threatening. I might view it as only one way, and I have to conquer that one way. That can be really hard in interpersonal relationships, especially if somebody's stuck there in a chronic kind of way.
Yeah, well, we do, circling back to like context of Hungry for Life, we do a lot of like cultural training. Oh my goodness, the word is slipping my mind right now. TJ, what is the... Not, it's... No. You know what? Okay. Anyways, it's a study of like power differentials in countries, like gender context, like all these different factors from our culture to other people's, or like third world culture, different countries. Hofstede's. Thank you. Have you heard of that? Okay. So, but like we in the West have this idea that we like our way is the best way. And, but like, if you think about somebody who's living in a series of micro traumas, and their only focus is survival, well, yeah, they're not thinking about their 5-year plan. They're not thinking about down the road, like, are their RSPs and all that kind of stuff. So it's just like an interesting, like, to circle back to that, like, okay, they're living in an entirely different state of mind. If you're living in trauma, and I would say most of our international partners are, like, they're thinking like, what am I going to eat tomorrow? Or, like, how am I going to survive that situation tomorrow or that one? So that's just an interesting point, even just like the series of micro traumas when you might not look at it that way. Like, well, and I would even say if we're engaging with people who are in that kind of situation, they often won't be able to say, hey, I'm experiencing a bunch of micro traumas, and so I'm feeling very restricted in my cognitive abilities, right? Like, it doesn't come out like that. It comes out like maybe making decisions that don't make sense to us, or wondering, do these people even want our help, or what are we doing wrong here that this isn't working? Those types of questions would rise with some frustration, and I think that if we know that they're in a certain place that they are likely experiencing trauma, I think just making lots of space for that, having compassion for how their body is responding, knowing that it's a beautiful system that God has given us, but theirs is being taxed to a point that is really hard to then make a sustainable plan for the future. And just understanding that that's not people trying to be difficult. That's not people bucking against, maybe learning or something like that. It can actually be a restricted ability to engage in other ways. Right. Yeah, great point. Let's talk about the cycle of trauma for a second. What is a cycle of trauma? Where does it start? Where does it end? How do you intercept it?
Yeah. So cycle of trauma starts with a distressing event. And then in response to that distressing event, we perceive danger, right? Our body kicks into this sympathetic nervous system, right? Fight, flight, or freeze, releases cortisol and adrenaline into our body. And then hopefully we create some kind of situation that gets us out of that danger, right? We're somehow, we get to some point where we're like, I'm safe now, right? And if that happens, if we find safety, then our body starts to calm down. Our sympathetic nervous system stops acting. Our parasympathetic nervous system takes over, right? That's our resting system. And we kind of chill out. Our blood goes back to where it is at rest. Like all these changes happen. Our cognitive capacity becomes more open and spacious. Yeah, that's awesome. Then that completes the cycle, right? We have the kind of a big exhale. That's one sign that we found safety, is our body kind of goes,
and I feel like I'm doing it as you're saying this. I'm like, I know the feeling. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Now, the difficult thing with trauma is that sometimes even when safety is established, we don't really get to have that exhale. So why? Because it's like our brain becomes fixated on where the next danger might come from. That's that hyperarousal. And so I don't know if you can imagine ever being super startled by something. You kind of were watching for something to be startling after that, right? So just take that and magnify it by a lot, right?
Like a haunted house.
Yeah, totally.
What's around the corner? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and even sometimes after you're out of a situation like that, you're still feeling a little on edge. Okay, so just imagine that way bigger, because the distressing event has been way bigger. And so two things can happen. Either we have brief exhales and then we get triggered easily back into that. It's like the part of our brain that signals danger is our amygdala, and it's just like the button becomes really hot or really easily hit, Oh
yes.
And so we have a much bigger reaction than what we would had we not been so stimulated previously.
Right.
So either we find these brief reprieves, and then our kind of danger button gets hit really, really quickly and easily, and we're popped back out of it often, or we can't even find that exhale, and we're just living sort of with a chronic state of hyperarousal.
So how do you intercept?
Yeah, because we don't want to stay there, right?
No, we don't.
Yeah. So, you see, easy answers and complicated answers. Healing from trauma is possible, so that's good news, right? Bad things happen. That's a reality. We don't have to always be governed by those things, but it does take work. It's not something that kind of snaps back super easily. And so there's a few things. In the moment, when somebody's feeling activated, I would really direct them toward their body and management of their sort of regulation of their body. So things like deep breathing, even crying sometimes. Deep breathing and crying, they both release cortisol. So your tears of emotional tears release cortisol, and deep breaths, when you take deep breaths and have a long exhale, you're basically telling your nervous system, hey, it's a safe time to exhale. Hey, I can let go. And it starts to switch from your sympathetic nervous system to your parasympathetic nervous system. You can do like grounding exercises, basically just trying to bring your attention fully into the moment. So like if I were sitting here, I would be like, what are 3 colors that I notice in the room? What can I smell? What can I hear? Right? And it takes me from thinking about these danger things out there to this moment. Where am I right now? Well, I'm safe. I can feel my feet on the floor. I can be right here. I can make eye contact with you and know that right here, right now, I'm okay. Right? And again, we're trying to trigger that sense of awareness that we're safe in this moment. There's lots of things like this, even cuddling with pets. There's the physical touch, that with humans also, but just there's all these easy touch points that actually give signals to our body that we're safe, because they're things we wouldn't do if we were in danger. Right?
You wouldn't go snuggle your animal.
No. And so one thing is regulating the body, kind of trying to get the body to actually engage the system that's appropriate at this time. So there's a bunch of things we can do for that. So that's one part of the issue.
Okay.
The other part of the issue is trying to allow our brain and that amygdala to settle down and stop giving so many false alarms, right? And so for that piece, I would really encourage people to seek counseling or seek help with a professional who can walk them through that.
That's not necessarily like a, oh, just wait it out situation.
I would say no. I would say that trauma unhealed is trauma lingering. And it's kind of going to be a hotspot that can be activated going forward. Mm-hmm. But trauma can be healed. So why not do that, right? Why not engage in a process that can actually lessen that response, can kind of eliminate some of those false alarms that are happening. Mm-hmm. There's some techniques. There's lots of techniques in the counseling world that help with trauma. EMDR is one of them. That's very helpful. OEI is one of them.
EMDR. Mm-hmm. My friend did it, mm-hmm. and she was like, "You basically just like tap your shoulders." I'm like, "Are you sure you're getting your money's worth there?" Like, is it basically you're just like a grounding thing again?
No. It's a little different. I mean, that what you're talking about is called bilateral stimulation, and yes, it does help people to ground themselves. Yeah. EMDR and OEI, it's kind of an offshoot of OEI. I don't do EMDR, I do OEI. Okay. We have therapists at Mercy Seat who do both.
Okay.
Both are good. Those kind of techniques are really cool. This is like some developments that have happened over the last couple of decades around neuroscience and whatnot. And basically what we're learning is the way that trauma is stored in the brain it's kind of fragmented. It can become disconnected. And so you can do work by bilaterally stimulating your brain or by using the occipital muscles of your eyes to really get at the core of what's going on in a trauma and to see relief faster than you can through the use of language very often. And so, that's a whole other topic we could dive into. But one of the things that at Mercy Seat I've been most just in awe of, I think, is watching the way that God can heal trauma. And it's pretty incredible to see the creator of our body, the one who created all these systems, who understands obviously how those things work, to see how movement from him can have an incredible healing impact on where people are stuck. Yeah.
I believe that.
Yeah.
I just wanted to circle back to one thing in the cycle of trauma. I'm thinking of some of our partners who their ministry is rescuing girls from trafficking. We recently did a podcast on attachment theory. And so I kind of was thinking about that and trauma and like us going there. Is that is that a touchy thing to do? Like, we always aim to create long-term relationships so that it's not just like you go, you send your money and you say hello and leave. No, like our aim is to build relationship. But like for girls who have been through that and then people coming in, essentially like, no, I'm going to pick my words here. But like what could be some things to look out for? That's how I'll word that question. In those type of situations.
Like specifically related to attachment and the connections that you're forming there.
Yeah. Given they've been through what they've been through.
Yeah. That's a big one, Jess. That has a lot to it.
You want to stay for part 2?
A couple things that I would say is that when we're in that highly activated state, forming attachments becomes much more difficult. Right? Again, if I'm being chased by a bear, I'm not as likely to like, oh, hang on, let me make sure that I'm connected here, right? I'm just running for dear life.
Yeah.
And so when our cortisol level is high, so when one of our chemicals is high, like that stress hormone is high, sometimes bonding can become difficult. That our bonding chemical is oxytocin, and when it has an inverse relationship with cortisol. So when cortisol is high, sometimes it can be hard to feel that bonding chemical. Also, if you can activate that bonding chemical, so if you can have a close connection with somebody who is going through something traumatic, it can bring cortisol levels down.
Okay.
And so it's kind of like you can expect if you're trying to connect with people who are going through something traumatic that it's not going to be the easiest thing for them to do at the outset. However, if you can form that close bond and they can feel a sense of camaraderie, safety with you, then that can actually have a very positive impact on regulating their body.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's good insight. I was just curious, like, is this something we shouldn't even be doing? Of course, like, we've considered these things. I'm not the project manager, so whoever is, I'm sorry. But yeah, just an interesting idea and something to consider for anyone who is doing any type of missions trip. Like, there's tons of mixed opinions out there on short-term teams anyway. So
I think one thing to remember, and kind of following in God's kind of plan, is that love is always powerful. And there's no amount of trauma that changes that. And so even in Mercy Seat, one of the things that we do is constantly we're looking at psychological modalities and looking at how do they fit with the truth that we know about God, you know, what works, what doesn't. And in every modality that I've ever seen used in the psychological world, there's always a pivot point. And that pivot point has to do with where a breakthrough of love or power can happen. And it's just kind of cool to look at our God who engages with us in loving ways and encourages us to go out into the world bearing love, you know, carrying that torch. And I don't think that we're ever going to be wrong with that. I don't think love does harm.
Good point. And I do want to spend a little bit more time talking about inviting Jesus into the trauma response, because I know this is like kind of something you hang your hat on as a counselor. And can you tell me more about like how do you guide people through that, and what does that look like, and why? Why do you think that Jesus is our ultimate healer of that?
Yeah. This fun part. Okay, probably the analogy that I have seen be quite helpful with people is that because trauma experiences are so unpleasant, right? And our brain is a predictive machine. When we go through something difficult, it's like our brain flips open a file and starts to take notes of every connection we can possibly make to what just happened, right? And so we'll record all kinds of information in this trauma file of things that may or may not be related to the actual trauma of the event. But our brain is scrambling to get every note taken. Why? So that we can avoid that in the future, right? So that we can be safe from these things in the future. Okay, so the trauma event finishes, and now we've got this file with all these notes in it. And every type of trauma work that I've ever come across, on some level, requires that we take that trauma folder out of storage, and that we open it up. And in therapy, we're always trying to open it up gently and with a sense of control. See, what the first time that thing happened, it just happened involuntarily. It happened to us. We couldn't say no in many situations. It was just upon us. And so in therapy, it's not like we grab that file and just go whoop, and plop it open, because that would re-injure, right? But we try to gently and carefully and at a pace that the client can handle, we try to kind of open up that file and start to look at what's in there. And as we start to look at what's in there, there's an opportunity to rewrite pieces of that file. And we can do that with all kinds of different modalities. But one of the things that's been so cool for me to witness is how engaging with God in those vulnerable places allows God's truth and his love to rewrite parts of that script. And so let's say for an example, there's somebody who encountered sexual abuse in some way. And one of the things that gets stored there, so a mind is trying to make absolute sense about why this is happening. And so they'll write down all kinds of things. And let's say one of the things that a child writes down is, I'm naughty, I'm bad, or I'm gross, right? These are some of the things that little minds or even adult minds might record in trying to make sense of why this is happening to them. And so when we invite Jesus into this experience, we open that file as gently as a client needs us to, and move through it tenderly. But where there's a place like that, we can lift some of those beliefs up toward God and say, Lord, what do you think here? Like, what? And obviously we do that in a systematic way, but I've seen God respond to people with these beautiful words like, you are my child, I delight in you, I created you, this does not define you, like any of those kinds of words or scripture, or often it's just a sense of experiential, like somebody is, maybe they're remembering this experience and it's dark and very lonely, and they'll call out to God in that place, and what they experience is maybe light just bursting into a room that's always been so dark. And I don't ever try to interpret that for them. I just witness it with them, and often they'll come to this explanation of, I'm not alone. I thought I was alone, but I was never alone, and God sees me and God loves me, and I'm not ugly, I'm not gross, I wasn't naughty. This was something atrocious that grieves his heart that was done to me. And so when things like that in that trauma file get rewritten, we then get to close that file with that new information in it, and it goes back on a shelf.
I love that.
And so then things might happen that are triggering, but when it triggers that file to get plopped open, there's now new information in there. And often it can interrupt the body's response to perceived danger, because instead they're like, I'm held, I have refuge, I know who my Lord is, I have safety with him. Things like that. And that can be a breakthrough. That can be a gateway to freedom for them.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Isn't that so awesome?
Yeah.
To see that God would do that for people.
Yeah, I love that. It's like a message of hope far beyond what any human being can give to another human being. And I love that.
Yeah. One of the things that I think has been really cool is to see that it seems to be, this is just anecdotal, I haven't done research on it, but it seems to be that the depth to which we're willing to go with God, with our pain and our vulnerability, is the depth to which we receive ministry from God. And so if we're crying out, if we're asking God for healing, but we're not going there, like we won't engage in opening that file really and letting any help in, then the deeper parts of us tend to stay stuck. But when we trust God into those deeper places, it's pretty remarkable the depth to which he can heal. There's a couple scriptures that come to mind. Psalm 148 verse 18 says, God will draw near to those who call out to him. Or James 4:8 says, draw near to God and he will draw near to you. Jeremiah 29, I think it's verse 13, says, when you seek him with all your heart, when you want him more than anything else, he will be found by you. And so I see that in these sweet places, these sacred places that I get to walk with people when they're vulnerable with God, and they're reaching for him out of the depth of their pain. And those scriptures just come true over and over, that he's there and he meets and he heals and he sets people free.
What a beautiful message of hope. And I kind of want to I value your time here, so I want to kind of guide us to the end here. But on that note of going deeper, something that I personally have found to help my personal faith is your devotional guide, which
thanks.
This is my shameless plug for Big Fresh Faith. Yeah. Lisa's written a study guide, and it really takes you, like, maybe you don't think you need to go deeper, and maybe you think that your level of trust in God is okay. This book took me there. So that's all I'll say. And where can people find it if they want it?
Yeah, Amazon's the easiest place.
Amazon. Yeah. Okay. Big Fresh Faith.
Yeah.
A Big Fresh Faith?
Just Big Fresh Faith.
Big Fresh Faith.
I'll just say one thing about that. It's not directly related to this trauma stuff that we're talking about.
You're right.
But the goal with that book is to look at how does our faith thrive even if we're going through difficult things, right? Subtitle is Revived by the Power and Presence of God, right? How do we encounter God in even our painful places or our places of disappointment in such a way that we can live with this vibrant and alive faith, not one that is just kind of white knuckling through life.
And through that book, it forces you to be honest with yourself and with God. And I think that kind of circling back to how it relates to our teams heading out, and just relating to people who are going through tough times. I think it's really important to lay it all out there and be honest, and don't like when we're dealing with people who are going through trauma, correct me if I'm wrong here, but like to have authenticity and honesty and grace and love in those moments.
Beautiful.
But the honesty and authenticity part, I think, is a really important part that often gets overlooked. So yeah. That's kind of all I have. I know we could go for probably 2 more hours, because there was like little topics along the way. I'm like, oh, let's grab onto that.
Yeah.
But anyways, wanted to thank you again for coming on.
Thanks.
And that's all. Did you want to say anything else?
Maybe just the thing that I would say, here's my shameless plug for Mercy Seat.
Yes.
Is just that if one of the listeners is in a place of kind of connecting with some of these descriptions of what's going on in their body, and like, oh man, maybe I am getting all these false alarms, just to encourage people to reach out for help. I mean, if that would be anywhere. Obviously, I have a lot of confidence in the therapists at Mercy Seat. There's a number of us there that kind of work together, and we try to be iron that sharpens iron all the time. And we do have people that are willing to take clients right now. We have some people who have full wait lists, but we do have some others that have space. Yeah. And so you don't have to suffer alone, right? You don't have to hold this stuff forever by yourself. So.
I would highly recommend Mercy Seat Ministry. And so, I'm sorry, I totally forgot. That was supposed to be my ending, which is, Mercy Seat has, I think, how many? You said 6?
I think we have 6 right now.
Yeah. And I've met a few of them, and they're all amazing people. And head to their website and fill out an intake form if you feel so inclined. And but again, like, seek out any help or open the word. And
for sure.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's all.
Thanks for having me, Jess.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Okay.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to What in the World, where we seek to educate and inspire. Here at Hungry for Life, we are passionate about your group having a global impact in eradicating needless suffering. For more information, head over to our website at hungryforlife.org, and you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and wherever you may listen to podcasts. Tune in every other week for another conversation about what is happening at Hungry for Life.